Hey everyone, welcome back. Are you ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to dig into some history.
Okay, perfect. Today, let's look at a part of World War II that, well, a lot of people don't really talk about too much.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
It is, it really is.
Yeah.
See, we're going to be focusing on Spanish soldiers,
Yeah.
Spanish soldiers who fought in the U.S. Army, specifically the 101st Airborne Division. You know, the Screaming Eagles.
Wow. The 101st Airborne, that's a legendary unit.
Totally. I mean, they were involved in some of the most important battles of the war, D-Day, Operation Market Garden, the Battle of the Bulge, and a lot of people know about them from, well, Band of Brothers, right?
Right. Band of Brothers definitely brought them into the spotlight. But Spanish soldiers in their ranks, that's something I haven't heard much about.
Exactly. And that's why we're doing this deep dive. We're going to learn about these guys, their stories, what led them to the 101st.
I'm all ears. Where are we getting all this information from?
So the main source for this deep dive is a YouTube video. It's called, and get ready for this, Españoles en la 101 División Aerotransportada de los Estados Unidos.
Okay, so we're going straight to the source, a Spanish language video. Makes sense.
Right. It's by this YouTuber, El Oráculo de Quindis. Apparently it tells the stories of 4 Spanish soldiers. Real fascinating stuff.
I can already tell this is going to be good.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, how much do we really know about World War II? You know, we think we've heard it all, but there are always these hidden stories waiting to be discovered. Stories about people from all walks of life, all corners of the world, coming together to fight for a common cause.
Absolutely. It really shows you the global scale of the conflict, how it touched so many lives in ways we might not even imagine.
Totally. And the 101st Airborne, I mean, they were at the heart of it all. So before we get to the Spanish soldiers, maybe we should talk a little bit about what made the 101st so legendary, what made them stand out.
Well, first and foremost, they were an airborne division, which meant they were trained to parachute behind enemy lines. Talk about dangerous.
Yeah, I can't even imagine jumping out of a plane into a war zone.
Seriously. But that's what made them so effective. They were like a spearhead, disrupting enemy lines and paving the way for other troops. And they were involved in some of the most crucial and daring operations of the war.
Like D-Day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
D-Day, Operation Market Garden, the Battle of the Bulge. They were right in the thick of it.
Wow. Those are some seriously heavy battles. I mean, especially D-Day. Parachuting into Normandy on June 6, 1944, with all that chaos and gunfire. That takes incredible bravery.
Absolutely. And they were known for their tenacity, their ability to hold their ground, even under the most intense pressure. That's actually how they got their nickname, the Screaming Eagles.
Screaming Eagles. Gotta admit, that's pretty badass.
Oh, for sure. It fit them perfectly.
Okay, so we've got this picture of this elite, highly skilled, fearless unit. They're jumping out of planes, fighting on the front lines, and earning their reputation as, well, badasses.
Right. And somewhere in all of that are these Spanish soldiers fighting alongside them. It's almost like a hidden layer of history, you know, something we don't often hear about.
Right, exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. So the video, it focuses on 4 Spanish soldiers in particular, right? Each with their own unique story.
Yeah, that's right. Each one adds a different perspective to the narrative of the 101st Airborne. It's like looking at the war through different lenses.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's start with the first soldier. What's his story?
So the first soldier we meet is Manuel Hidalgo, and his story is a wild one. Get this, he was born in West Virginia to Spanish immigrants.
Okay, born in the U.S., but Spanish heritage. Got it.
Yeah, but then his family moves back to Spain when he's young, so he grows up there. But then they have to flee during the Spanish Civil War and end up back in the U.S.
So he's moving back and forth between countries, all while there's a civil war going on.
Pretty much. And when he gets back to the U.S., he's basically on his own, barely speaks English. You can imagine how tough that must have been.
Man, that's rough. What a crazy start to his life. And then he ends up in the 101st Airborne.
He does. Eventually, he enlists in the U.S. Army and ends up assigned to the 327th Infantry Regiment, which was part of the 101st.
Okay, so 327th Infantry Regiment, part of the 101st. Got it. But wait, wasn't the 101st an airborne division? Didn't they all parachute into battle?
Well, not exactly. While the 101st was known for its airborne operations, not everyone jumped out of planes. In fact, Manuel's regiment actually landed on Utah Beach on D-Day +1.
D-Day +1. So the day after the main invasion.
Right. They were brought in by landing craft, not gliders. Apparently there weren't enough gliders to transport everyone at once.
Wow, I never knew that. So even within the 101st, there were different experiences of D-Day.
Exactly. Different units, different roles, different ways of entering the fight.
So what was Manuel's role in the 327th? What did infantry regiments do?
Think of them as the backbone of the army, the ground troops who engage in direct combat. They fought on the front lines, captured and held territory, really slugged it out with the enemy.
Got it. So they were right in the thick of the action. Sounds intense. And this Manuel guy, he was known for his, was it colorful language?
Oh yeah, he had a reputation for that. Even though his English wasn't perfect, he apparently knew how to curse like a sailor. There's this story in a book, Glider Infantryman Behind Enemy Lines in World War Zones, where he used his heavily accented German to trick some enemy soldiers into surrendering.
Wait, hold on. He used his Spanish accent to imitate German? That's incredible. And it worked.
Apparently so. It just goes to show you, sometimes the most unexpected skills can come in handy in wartime. Who knew a Spanish accent could sound like German?
That's amazing. It makes you wonder what other hidden talents did these soldiers bring to the battlefield.
Right. It challenges our assumptions about what skills were valuable in war, and it highlights how these diverse backgrounds could be real assets.
Okay, so this Manuel, this quick-witted, multilingual soldier, he made it through the war, right?
He did, and he earned several medals for his service, including the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Good Conduct Medal.
Wow, that's impressive. So after all that, what did he do with his life?
Well, he used his GI benefits to become a barber, of all things, and he worked as a barber for an incredible 63 years.
63 years. Wow, that's dedication. He really lives a full life after the war. Okay, so we've got Manuel, the quick-thinking, multilingual soldier. Tell me about the next Spanish soldier featured in the video.
Well, the next soldier we encounter is Celestino Landera Arniela, another son of Spanish immigrants. But his story, unfortunately, takes a bit of a darker turn.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Celestino, well, he was born in Florida. His parents were Spanish immigrants too, and he enlisted in the army back in 42. So right after the U.S. entered the war.
Got it. And did he end up in the 101st too? Like Manuel?
He did. And you know what's interesting? He was also assigned to the 327th Infantry Regiment.
The same regiment as Manuel. Wow, that's quite a coincidence, two Spanish soldiers ending up in the same unit.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if there was like some sort of policy back then, maybe grouping soldiers together based on language or maybe cultural background. Do you think that happened?
You know, that's an interesting thought. It's possible, I guess, but I don't think it was like a common practice. I think the army was mainly focused on just getting soldiers where they were needed as quickly as possible, filling those units. So I doubt they were paying too much attention to things like cultural background when making assignments.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it was wartime, right?
Right.
Speed and efficiency were probably the top priorities. Okay, so Celestino, he's in the 327th, fighting on the front lines. What were his experiences like during the war?
Well, by all accounts, he was a brave soldier, saw a lot of action. He fought in Operation Market Garden, that daring but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to capture a series of bridges in the Netherlands.
Oh yeah, I remember you mentioning that earlier. Wasn't that the one where they tried to use paratroopers and tanks to make a quick advance but ended up facing fierce resistance?
That's the one. It was a tough battle, lots of casualties, and then Celestino also fought in the Battle of the Bulge. That brutal winter battle in Bastogne.
Oh man, Bastogne. That was like one of the toughest battles of the war, right? Freezing cold, heavy snow, surrounded by Germans.
Exactly. It was a desperate fight, and Celestino was right in the middle of it. He even earned the Bronze Star for his bravery.
The Bronze Star, wow. That's a pretty significant medal. He must have really shown some serious courage under fire.
He did, but the sad part is, well, after surviving all those campaigns, all those battles, he was killed by friendly fire.
Friendly fire. Oh man, that's awful. When did that happen?
It was just a few months after the war in Europe had ended.
Wow. So after going through all that, surviving all those battles, he makes it through the war only to be killed by his own side. That's just heartbreaking.
It really is. He was only 27 years old. It just goes to show you the war, it didn't always end when the fighting stopped. The danger, it could still be there, even after the guns fell silent.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder of the unpredictable nature of war. How even when you think it's over, it can still reach out and take you. Okay, well, ready to shift gears a little. Let's talk about the next soldier, the one who went from Arizona to Spain and back again.
Oh, yeah, Belio Marquez Leon. Now, his story is a fascinating one. It really shows how, immigration and those big world events, they all kind of got tangled up together during this time.
Okay, yeah, tell me more. What's his story?
Well, his parents, they were from Spain, a town called Albentosa,
Yeah.
but he was actually born in Arizona.
Born in the U.S., got it.
Yeah.
But then he ends up in Spain.
Right, right. His family moves back to Spain when he's still young, so he spends a chunk of his childhood there. But then eventually he comes back to the U.S. and enlists in the army.
So he's kind of got this, like, dual identity thing going on, right? Born in the U.S., raised in Spain, then back to the U.S. for the war. That's got to be a unique perspective.
Yeah, for sure. You gotta wonder how he felt about it all, being caught between two cultures during such a chaotic time in history.
Absolutely. Okay, so he enlists in the army. Where does he end up?
Well, he ends up in a unit you might recognize, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment.
The 506th. Wait a minute, isn't that the one from Band of Brothers?
Yep, that's the one. Now, we don't know for sure if he actually knew any of those guys, the ones from the series, but he definitely would have shared a lot of the same experiences. Fighting in Normandy, the Netherlands, the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow, so he was jumping out of planes with those guys. Talk about being in the thick of it. What exactly did the 506 do? I mean, I know they were paratroopers, but what was their specific role?
Well, the parachute infantry regiments, like the 506, they were trained for airborne assaults. Dropping behind enemy lines to capture key objectives before the main forces arrived.
So they were like the first wave paving the way for everyone else. Sounds pretty dangerous.
Oh, it was. And Abilio, he went through a lot. He got wounded by shrapnel during Operation Market Garden, and then later he suffered from trench foot during the Battle of the Bulge.
Trench foot. I've heard that term before, but I don't really know what it is. What is it exactly?
Basically, it's what happens when your feet are exposed to cold and wet conditions for too long. Imagine standing in freezing water for days on end.
Oh, yikes. That sounds awful. So he was wounded, got trench foot. Did he make it through the war?
He did. After the war, he went back to Arizona, got married, had a family.
Wow. So even after all that, he was able to build a life for himself. That's pretty amazing.
It is. It just shows you the resilience of these guys, And you want to hear something else. His son, he ended up serving in the Navy during the Vietnam War.
No way. So a family legacy of military service. That's incredible. Okay, we've got one more soldier to cover. This is the one whose story highlights the lasting impact of war wounds, right?
Yeah, his story really makes you think about the sacrifices these soldiers made and how the war, didn't really end for them when they came home,
Right. The wounds, both the physical and the emotional ones, they could linger for years, even a lifetime. It's a good reminder that we need to remember and honor those sacrifices, not just on Veterans Day or Memorial Day, but all the time.
Couldn't agree more. So this last soldier, Donald William Timmins, he was born in Illinois, also to Spanish immigrants.
Okay, so another son of Spanish immigrants. Got it. And what was his life like before the war?
Well, he worked as a draftsman before enlisting in 42.
42, okay. And where did he end up serving? Which unit?
He was assigned to the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion.
Airborne Engineer Battalion. That's a new one. We haven't talked about those yet. What do they do exactly?
So the Airborne Engineer Battalions, they were basically there to support the other airborne units, like the infantry and the paratroopers. They did all sorts of things, like building and demolishing bridges, clearing obstacles, putting up fortifications, basically anything that needed to be done to make sure the other guys could do their jobs.
So they were kind of like the construction crew, but in a war zone, making sure the pathways were clear for the infantry and the paratroopers to advance.
Exactly. And they often faced just as much danger as the frontline troops, working under fire in all sorts of tough conditions. Donald, for example, he parachuted into Normandy on D-Day, part of that initial assault force.
Wow, D-Day. I mean, we've talked about it a bit already, but it's hard to even grasp what it must have been like to be part of that.
Yeah.
Dropping into a heavily defended area and knowing you're probably going to face intense resistance, that takes a whole other level of courage.
No doubt about it. And for Donald, things took a bad turn pretty quickly.
What happened?
Right after he landed, as he was taking off his parachute, he got shot. Twice by a sniper.
Oh, wow. That's terrible. Where did he get hit?
In the leg.
Yeah.
It fractured his right femur.
A fractured femur. Man, that's a serious injury. What happened to him after that?
So he was actually treated by German doctors first. Then the next day, American forces captured the area and he was evacuated to England. That's where they diagnosed him with the fractured femur. And Later on, they found out he had osteomyelitis.
Osteomyelitis. I've never heard of that. What is it?
It's a bone infection, pretty serious stuff.
Wow, so a fractured femur and a bone infection. That must have been incredibly painful. What happened to him after that? Did you ever recover?
Well, those injuries basically ended his time in the war. He spent almost a year recovering before he could go home in 45.
Wow. So even though he survived the war, those injuries, they stayed with him. A constant reminder of what he went through.
Exactly. His story, like the others we talked about today, reminds us that the effects of war, they don't just disappear when the fighting stops, you know? They can have a lasting impact on people's lives in ways we might not always see.
That's a powerful message. And it's something we should all keep in mind, especially when we think about the sacrifices made by veterans. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the stories of Spanish soldiers in the 101st Airborne, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this episode?
I think the most important thing to remember is that World War II, it wasn't just fought by Americans, you know? It was a global conflict, and people from all over the world contributed to the Allied victory, even if their stories aren't always told in the history books.
Right. And it's important to remember those stories, to recognize the diversity of those who fought and sacrificed. These Spanish soldiers, they're a perfect example of that. Their stories, they challenge our assumptions about what we think we know about the war. They add a whole new layer of complexity and understanding to the narrative.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes history so fascinating. There's always more to learn, more to uncover, more stories waiting to be told.
Exactly. And to our listener, we leave you with this. What other hidden stories from history are out there? What other perspectives are waiting to be discovered? And how can we as individuals make sure those stories are heard and remembered?